Good morning.
Good morning, Matt.
To the Metro Board's Finance and Capital Committee meeting on September 23rd. I'm Matt Letourneau, Chairman of the committee. We will start this morning with our safety contact. Teresa Impastato, our Chief Safety Officer, will start us off.
Thank you, sir. National Preparedness Month is an observance each September to raise awareness about the importance of preparing for disasters and emergencies that could happen at any time. The 2021 theme is Prepare to Protect. Preparing for disasters is preparing everyone you love. Natural disasters don't wait for a convenient time. Preparing for them shouldn't wait either. Start today by signing up for alerts, safeguarding important documents, and taking other low and no-cost preparedness actions to lessen the impact of disasters and emergencies for you and your loved ones. Be sure to review your plans against the latest public health guidance available from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. This concludes our safety contact.
Thank you, Teresa. Since this is the first meeting of the day for the Metro Board, I'll ask the Board Corporate Secretary to call the roll.
Great. Chair Letourneau.
Present.
Vice Chair Slater.
Present.
Director Babers.
Present.
Director Klein.
Present.
Director Smedberg.
Present.
Director Drummer.
Present.
Alternate Director Bulger.
Present.
Alternate Director Helfer.
Present.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. Our first order of business is to approve the agenda. If there are no objections, I will consider the agenda approved as presented. Are there any objections? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Next, we'll move to the approval of the minutes. We have the minutes of our September 9th meeting. Are there any objections to the minutes as presented? Hearing none, we'll consider the minutes approved as presented. We have one item on our agenda, and this will be a work session on Metro's fare policy. The board is continuing to review how fares meet riders' changing needs as the region emerges from the pandemic. We've heard in previous sessions that price may not be the biggest barrier to riding Metro, but we're looking at ways to potentially get more riders in non-peak travel hours if we have different pricing, or even during peak travel hours for people with disability. Continuously review how pricing supports them. This is an important discussion as part of our budget process. Today is really the first sort of in-depth look at fare policy and concepts that we've had. You're going to see a presentation with slides that get into some specific options for the committee and for the board to consider. I want to make clear, though, that we don't have to limit our discussion just to the things that are being presented. There may be some other ideas that folks have that they want to take a look at. And what we're really looking for from this is a level of interest from the board in some of these concepts so that staff can do more analysis and start looking more at the financial implications of some of these. Of course, we'll get into more detail on this in future meetings, but you're all aware of the fact that we do have a limitation on our federal funding that will hit in a few years. And so we have to have that context as we look at some of these options. But I will turn the floor over to Mr. Webster and have staff begin the presentation.
Mr. Chairman, this is Paul Wiedefeld, the GM. If I could just make one.
Certainly, Paul.
Thank you, sir. And particularly for the new board members. This is really a continuation of discussion the board has had really for over a year plus. And a good part of it is around how do we respond to COVID and bring back ridership. But also it's deeper than that. It deals with some of the equity issues that the board has been trying to address as well. So it's the combination of both of those. So I think when you see some of the concepts, again, it's trying to hit both of those. How do we increase ridership and how do we have a more equitable system to serve the entire community, which is a priority for the board. So I just wanted to make sure that the new members understood that as well. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Tom, shall we turn it over to you?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Wiedefeld, and good morning, Chairman Letourneau and members of the committee and the board. My name is Tom Webster. I'm Metro's Executive Vice President for Strategy, Planning, and Program Management. So as we discussed, the purpose of today's briefing is to review proposed updates to Metro's fare policy principles, as well as consider potential additional fare concepts for further development. And this follows, as Mr. Wiedefeld said, more than a year of discussion, and specifically the fare policy overview presentation in July that reviewed Metro's current fare structure and discussed potential updates to fare policy principles. Just for reference, we've included a number of those slides in the appendix for reference. For some big picture context, here's sort of a high level summary of our research and general research into what drives ridership up and down. This includes factors that affect both the size of the market, so the total number of daily trips, travel trips on any mode in the region, and then Metro's share of trips, and then the drivers of variability that happen day to day. Of course, the pandemic has been a major factor and reduced both the overall travel market in the region and across the country, but also the transit market share of travel. We've seen significant reductions in traditional peak period office worker commuting trips, and because of the Delta variant and other factors, that's expected to continue for some time. Private sector leaders have pushed office returns further into the future, and federal agencies remain largely in telework status for most office workers. But of course, throughout the pandemic, we've also seen the importance of bus and rail service for essential workers and those who need to travel to get to work, to medical appointments, and the like. So the relative importance of service compared to fares or versus fares is generally similar across our customer surveys and analysis of observed behavior of riders and customers. And so when asked, riders generally indicate that service frequency, reliability, and timeliness is a higher priority for them. And when we analyze the effects of service and fare changes, service changes generally have a larger impact on rider behavior. That's not to say, of course, that fares are unimportant. And as you can see in these examples, they're definitely meaningful issues for customers and potential customers, and affect their decisions. It can always vary based on the specific service or fare change and the potential riders affected. But I think importantly, fares are definitely a barrier to some, particularly low-income parts of our communities, and changes in fare policy that target that particular segment of our community can improve equity and can improve access and mobility. So Metro has not increased fares since June of 2017, so it's been about 4 years. And the board has acted to update fare pricing and fare products over that span of time, with a focus recently on promoting ridership and advancing equity. Recent fare actions include expanding pass products to make them a better value for customers, adding bus trips to what were previously just rail passes. And this month, Metro implemented free rail bus transfers, the $2 weekend one-way fares, and more affordable 7-day bus pass, and the 30-day pass promotion. These changes are significant, and several were just implemented this month. So it will take some time to see what impact the changes have and how our customers respond. Prior to the pandemic, about a third of Metro's revenue came from passenger fares, parking, and other sort of business revenues direct to Metro's budget. Of course, during the pandemic, that has dramatically shrunk, and federal relief has helped bridge that funding gap last fiscal year in FY21, and is projected to do the same in FY22, with a total of about $760 million of federal relief planned to support the 22 budget. So more than a decade ago, the board approved Metro's current fare policy principles. And while those principles are still generally relevant and appropriate, there is an opportunity to refresh them now, since it has been over a decade. Fare policy principles just generally provide a framework. They guide development and evaluation of potential fare policy changes. So to support the board's consideration of new fare policy principles or refreshed policy principles, we've drafted these potential updates, including that fares be customer focused, convenient, equitable, seamless, and built to drive ridership. So when evaluating and considering fare policy, it's important to balance several different factors, of course. When fare policies are simple, it helps make Metro easy to use and minimizes our cost of fare collection. However, there's also an opportunity for Metro to generate revenue, to advance equity or other goals through policies or products that introduce some complexity to the fare structure. So in evaluating fare concepts, it's important to consider those trade-offs and the tensions between those different goals and try to find the right balance. So potential fare concepts for consideration fall into 4 major categories: pricing, targeted discounts, fare structure, and passes. The first category, pricing, or what generally the fare levels are. This includes, for example, potential general fare increases, reduced fares, or even, to go all the way there, free fares, which would, of course, require a fundamental rethinking of transit funding and how things are structured in our region. Targeted discounts focus on specific groups or customer groups to encourage certain kinds of ridership or trip making. These include discounts for low-income riders or to encourage the use of available capacity, such as reverse commutes, where generally the trains and buses are have more capacity. Updates to fare structure covers a whole broad range of concepts, including the recently implemented free rail to bus transfers and potential to further change how fares differ based on distance traveled or the time that customers are riding. And then changes to passes include changes to types of passes offered or the cost of passes relative to the standard fare. So the green boxes on this chart are changes that have been implemented already or in the process of being implemented. And I'll discuss the items in the blue boxes as potential concepts for committee and board consideration over the next few slides here. And just as a reminder, these are concepts for discussion. They're not recommendations or proposals at this point. But just to lay out some ideas and support the committee's discussion of where you want to go next. So the first is a concept. It's a flat $1 bus fare. This option would be, of course, targeted to the bus mode, which has a much higher share of price-sensitive customers and low-income customers relative to rail. And a reduction of basically a 50% reduction in the fare from the base fare from $2 to $1 would make the bus much more affordable for low-income riders and would encourage some riders to take more trips and improve their, again, access and mobility around the region. Of course, this would be expensive, as many existing customers would pay half of what they pay today. That would be a revenue reduction for Metro's budget, but would advance equity considerably for the region. The next concept is that the board could consider is discounting parking rates, either temporarily or longer term, to increase parking utilization, but more importantly, increase rail ridership. The concept would be to set parking rates to target higher usage and again, maximizing rail ridership. Options for implementation could be just a straight reduction in the parking prices, or free evenings, or some combination of those things. Another concept for consideration is discounting fares for low-income riders. So low-income riders are typically much more price sensitive than the average rider, and they make choices every day about whether to travel or not based on what they can afford. And they're also much less likely to receive either tax or employer-based subsidies through smart benefits or other programs. So a concept the board could consider and explore further is making low-income riders eligible for discounted fares that we offer seniors and riders with disabilities, which is essentially a 50% discount. This type of program would target discounts to those who need the most and improve access and mobility. It could also have positive benefits for both ridership and fare evasion, and potentially improve our capacity or ability to raise general fares over time, because we would have discounts targeted at the low-income communities, and that we'd be able to strike a different balance. Like most fare discount programs, this would very likely not pay for itself, at least in the near term, and would reduce revenue. There is a trial pilot that's in development with our partners in DC, and that's expected to begin next year. So these concepts or options could be targeted to riders through enrollment in other designated means tested programs such as Medicaid or SNAP, so that Metro and the jurisdictions would not have to establish a whole new administrative apparatus to confirm eligibility in the program. So some private companies have structured programs similarly as is shown in the example on the right of the slide. This could be integrated with our existing discounted fare programs, and could be funded either through jurisdictional sort of direct reimbursement or through general subsidy. The next concept is the potential for a lower and frankly simpler flat fare structure for Metro Access riders, rather than charging riders fare based on the fixed route equivalent fare, which is how it's done today, up to a maximum of $6.50. Riders could be charged a flat fare regardless of the distance or time or nature of their trip. This would be more affordable for many riders, definitely simpler for them, though it would also likely have some cost and subsidy impacts over the long term. The next concept is the potential to expand that $2 weekend flat fare and consider a $2 late night rail fare that would support late night workers and the region's late night economy overall. These $2 fares could start sometime in the evening, say 9:30, and run until the system closes 7 days a week. Certainly would encourage ridership during less busy hours when the rail system has considerable capacity, but in the near term, again, would also reduce revenue relative to what current customers are paying today. So as it stands today, peak trips cost riders more than off-peak trips. So another option the board could consider is to consolidate peak and off-peak rail fares, eliminating that differential between the two types of fares. This would certainly simplify Metro's rail fare structure and definitely encourage ridership, and would better align, I think, with the ridership patterns we're seeing today, though it would definitely lead over the long term to significant revenue loss relative to pre-pandemic, and it would forego the opportunity to tailor fares to riders' general willingness to pay more during the peak period, and crowding could also become a concern as ridership recovers into the future here. So finally, another consideration, by updating passes, Metro could adapt to new ridership patterns and encourage more pass sales. In general, passes encourage more ridership by essentially committing customers to transit into Metro, and then reducing the cost of trips they take beyond the base price of the pass to essentially zero. So once you've paid, you can ride unlimited for the time period that the pass runs. One concept could be to update our monthly passes, which are based on right now multiple of 36 trips, to reflect market changes and of course increased telework. We could reduce that multiplier to some other number to make the passes more attractive. This would better align Metro's passes with evolving ridership patterns and could encourage more riders to commit to transit and over the long term increase revenue, though it also risks reduced revenue from existing pass users. So moving on from those concepts, Metro is also working to modernize our fare system through capital investments, restoring the fare system's state of good repair and improving the customer experience. Many of these are already implemented or are underway. Mobile payment was launched last fiscal year in FY21 through Apple and Google. The Metro Rail Faregate replacement is underway. Those who've been in the system have probably seen some of the new Faregates being installed. And we're in the design phase of the Metrobus fare box replacement program. We're also pilot testing Metrobus rear door payment targets in calendar year 22. And we've initiated market research and planning in back office systems modernization, which would, as we discussed back in July, improve our long-term flexibility in fare policy. And so I'll speak a little bit more about that on the next slide. We've also worked to update Smart Trip customer interfaces on WMATA's website and are advancing some other modernizations and improvements to improve the simplicity and access of those interfaces that customers use. So our current fare system is reasonably reliable, but the core of it is based on an old technology, 25, 30 years old. And back office systems that were designed decades ago. So we have system upgrades in early planning and development right now that would enable new capabilities and more flexibility, as I mentioned. So our current system stores information locally on customers' cards or now on their phones, and it doesn't update in real time, which limits the ability to make customer-friendly improvements and adds some complexity for our customers. So improvements to the back office systems could include real-time communications, account-based systems, open payments, which is essentially when you walk up and you're an infrequent user or a tourist or just in town for a round trip, you can use your credit card and tap the gate. And then finally, fare capping, which is a way that allows riders to essentially pay as you go up to a cap for a period of time. And there's potentially tremendous equity benefits. So if you think about it today, riders have basically two choices. They can pay as you go and pay for each trip as they arrive at the bus or the train, or they can buy a pass, put some money in up front for unlimited rides for a period of time. What fare capping does is it would allow customers to pay as you go up to a certain maximum price, which is essentially a pass, but grants access to people who may not be able to afford buying that pass up front. So our existing system doesn't have the capability to do this, but this is something we're looking at in the planning and development of the next system. So next steps, the draft fare policy principles that I mentioned earlier, put those before the board, the committee and the board for consideration. The committee could adopt those potentially next month. Today in the work session, looking forward to supporting that discussion, and then we would further develop concepts that are of interest to the committee and the board, and as Chairman Letourneau said, consider some of the financial and ridership implications of those. And then, of course, the general manager's budget will be proposed later this fall and could incorporate some of those concepts. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. That concludes the presentation.
Thanks, Tom. There is a tremendous amount of information here. I could see us having potentially more than one round of questions, but if you do want to get started and you want to raise your hand, maybe while that's happening, I do have some specific questions, but let me just start with one overall one, and then I'll recognize some of my colleagues. Are there any concepts that you've looked at so far that will both raise ridership and raise revenue?
In the near term, no. There are potential concepts that we could explore that would have that those characteristics over the long term, but the focus of these concepts is primarily on encouraging ridership and advancing equity.
Okay. I don't know if anybody else is. I'm having trouble seeing whose hands are raised. I can only see the ones that their faces in my screen. So I can see we had one raised first, and then we had Greg. So who else is?
Matt, I can see him. It's like Tom and Lucinda both had their hands up.
Okay, I think Lucinda was actually first then, since it was one I couldn't see. So let me go to her next, and then we'll get through everybody.
Thank you, Chair Letourneau. And Tom, thank you again for yet another great presentation on what your team has been working on. And I do recognize that we don't have a lot of data related to what's being presented because none of these are recommendations. And so I know that first you want to gauge the board interest in the various options that are being put in front of us. So as it relates to slide 10, which showed the customer survey, and it showed that 10% of the customer surveyed indicated that fares was a priority, and it had, I think, on time, thank you. It had more frequent service and more reliable service was in the 20% range. I am just going to say that based on that information, in terms of what I would say, and this is really interesting for me to say because I represent the district and we rely heavily on Metrobus, but I would question why we would be looking at reducing bus fares from $2 to $1 when we want to target instead the low income participants and provide them with some relief. But of course, we all know that not everyone who rides the bus need the reduced fare. I mean, I ride the bus and I don't need the reduced fare. So I would want to make sure that that's highlighted. Now, what I do want when I ride the bus is right up there in the 20%. I want the more frequent services, and I also want reliable and faster service. So it would be my preference to really not look at the $1, but to focus more on the low income discount option. So I just wanted to state that in terms of where I would be headed. Now, when we get to slide 11, which is the discounted parking, are you all going to include for consideration the option such that if you if you get into the parking garage or the parking area by 9 o'clock, you get this reduced fare, but after 9 o'clock it increases? Is that going to be a part of what you think that you'll look at?
We certainly could, yes, in terms of the discount applying to certain time periods, yeah.
Okay, great, because of course I know that you're aware that throughout the region, quite a lot of our garages that are privately managed, that's one way they try to get people to into their lots, and I think it works halfway decent. Okay, slide 14, Metro access. So you all are indicating that you would consider this to be a $4 flat fare. Did you all consider any other flat fares such as $5? I mean, what's so special about the $4?
Nothing in particular. It's something close to the average fare, but there's nothing magical about that. Certainly, it could be a different number.
Okay, because I know that you all are aware that DC, we have something similar to Metro Access to kind of be a companion to it, called Transport DC, and so we much prefer people to utilize Metro Access, but we also would look at any fare changes to Metro Access in terms of how that would impact our Transport DC. So I was just wondering how that $4 came to be. For slide 15. So for me, this one is a little hard to give a input into in terms of whether I would support it or not, because I would think we need some more ridership information in terms of like currently, what's the ridership in terms of going from downtown to the suburbs or vice versa. So are you all waiting to give us more detailed ridership information for these various concepts? Are you waiting to gauge our interest in them? Or can we get ridership information such as for the consolidated peak and off-peak fares? We would also need ridership information in terms of the different stations during the different peak times in order, in my opinion, to make a decision. So is that ridership information coming later, or what's the what are you all thinking there?
Yeah, I'm certainly for areas of interest here, we can dig into ridership by time period and some of those the patterns you're describing, and particularly for this one, what ridership after 9:30 has been during the pandemic and pre-pandemic. Provide some information there.
Okay, and is that also true in terms of these concepts, in terms of what impact they would have on the budget? Because right now in the pros and cons section, you just say like some revenue reduction, but we don't have any cost estimates of exactly what the reduction would be. Are you waiting to give us more detail on that?
Yeah, that is definitely a critical next step that would follow this discussion. Yes.
Yeah, and just to cut in there, I think the idea is if the board is interested in any of these things, then staff is sort of keeping track of what we're saying that we're interested in, and then they would do more analysis. If we're not interested, then I think we just kind of move on.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, this is Paul Wiedefeld. The only other thing I would think that we all have to recognize is that pre-pandemic, estimating ridership was a little bit clearer. It's going to be much harder for us to give you definitive answers. I mean, again, we all are working through this together. So I think just as we generate those numbers, we just have to keep that in mind, because as this marketplace is changing around us, we just don't have the models, nor does anyone in the industry, to be frank, have the models that can give you maybe as exact as we would pre-pandemic. I just want to make sure that we all keep that in mind. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And then my last question, Tom, is do we have any information so far on the mobile payment system that's been rolled out? I mean, is how are riders embracing that?
It is going well, and it's been growing steadily. So the Apple launched last September. We had an initial bump in utilization, and it's grown over time. Google and Android launched a few months ago, and similarly, it's growing both on rail and bus. We're interested to see what happens this fall as some riders are coming back and taking more trips, and seeing the new fare gates and seeing the overall modernization of the system. So we're watching that closely.
Okay. Thank you, Chair Letourneau.
Thank you for the good questions. Okay, I'm going in order that we saw the hands go up, and that would be Sarah next.
Well, thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that excellent presentation. Really raised a lot of important issues. And obviously there's a number of considerations here, the pandemic being one. I think this is an important conversation to have, but I do recognize, as Mr. Wiedefeld just said, that future ridership trends may be different, may be similar. We don't really know at this moment. That being said, we'll base some of this conversation on how things used to be. And with that in mind, a couple of points I wanted to raise. First of all, I completely agree with Board Member Baber's comments regarding the balance between service and fares. I think the survey data that you shared demonstrates just how important service frequency and reliability is in driving ridership, even more so than fares. That being said, there are many people in our region for whom the fares can be burdensome. And I think the idea of low-income fare structure, where the discounts would be targeted to people who need them, is probably, from my perspective, a reasonable way to balance the need for revenue and the need for ridership and the need to make sure that there's regional equity and everyone has access to the system. A couple of more specific questions. I'm still getting up to speed on the transfer structure, not just within WMATA's service, but also with the local bus and commuter rail systems. I know that the rail to bus transfer was recently eliminated. Is there a bus to rail transfer as well? And how, so that's part one. And part two is, how does Metro's decision about transfers affect what the local bus and commuter rail systems do?
Tom, did you get that question?
I did, yes. So yes, the board recently acted to remove the bus rail to bus transfer. There does remain an upcharge when you move from bus to rail, as rail has a higher fare. In terms of the individual jurisdictions and how all that works, let me get back to you with some details on all those structures. There's some complexity there, but I'm happy to follow up with more information.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to that. I think one of the important things as Metro is considering upgrades to the fare collection fare boxes and such and the back office systems, it's going to be important to coordinate those with other transportation providers around the region in the interest of the seamless system that's in the new fare principles. Because one of the most challenging thing for riders is having to maintain multiple different types of passes and fares. And if we are moving toward a more seamless system, I think that would be beneficial for everyone. The upcharge that you mentioned for getting on rail, does that subtract what you've already paid for bus?
Yeah. Yes.
It does. Okay. And I'll look forward to more information on the regional, how it spreads throughout the region. I do think that in the draft fare principles, there's an acknowledgement that we do need to see adequate revenue to sustain service. I'm curious what that means, because does that mean sustain the service we have today? As we just talked about, there's certainly some desire to improve service and expand service and provide better service and that sort of thing. So is this sufficiently aspirational, I guess, with regard to service is a question that I'll pose to the room. You don't have to answer that right now, Mr. Webster.
Okay.
Those are the questions and comments that I have for now. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Klein. We'll go to Vice Chair Slater next.
Good morning. Thank you so much. Just a kind of a few thoughts. I mean, I think, let me start always by saying that, you know, our price sensitive customers aside, you know, the fare structure, I think, as we've seen is, or the fares and ridership, as we've seen, is really centered around that safe, frequent, reliable service. And so that really is our focus for kind of gaining ridership. On the fare side, you know, I think I really like a few options here. And I think about, when I think about fare options, I think about really kind of three categories. One is programs for our lower income transit dependent riders. I think I see some options here for that. I think second, you know, what I think about is options that kind of meet people where they are kind of post-pandemic. So, you know, options for that flexible work schedule, that hybrid work schedule. I think I see a little bit of that. I don't know that I see enough of that. So I'd love to see a little bit more of that. You know, things like multi-day passes that have longer expiration dates and those types of things, so that people can kind of go into those options. Because I think as work patterns settle and people understand kind of when they're going to be in the office, when they're not, those types of things post-pandemic, I think we just need to have options for that type of a worker. And then kind of the third bucket I really think about is simplicity. And I do see some of that in this. I really like the flat fare for Metro Access. I think that's a great option. You know, I don't know enough to say what the price is, what the right price is, and some data behind that, but I do like that flat fare option for our Metro Access customers. You know, and really just kind of one question, you know, the dollar bus fare or option, did we consider an option, and I saw a little bit of this in some of the past offerings, but not completely, but did we consider a similar option, which was, and again, I don't know exactly what the right price would be, but did we consider a similar option for kind of the day-long pass, meaning, you know, one price for, you know, however many trips you need to take in a given day versus kind of that flat fare option?
Yeah, that's something we certainly can look at. So a day pass price, as well as the weekly bus price that the board just acted to reduce the price. So yes.
Great. All right, thank you. But a lot of good thoughts here and a lot of good options for us to really consider as we understand kind of what this post-pandemic travel is going to be. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I had.
Thank you, Mr. Slater. Next, we'll go to Mr. Bulger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tom, thank you for the scintillating policy discussion. I had another idea that I wanted to run by, and it kind of is joined by the fact that the chairman asked for ridership data was earlier this week, Matt, I think, and it showed some uptick, but not like showstopper on rail. And I thought it was helpful to keep that data and a methodology that goes with it in front of us all the time before we get into fair decisions. Second, I understand what Paul said, that we don't have a methodology to track the future, post-pandemic, telework, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So given our ridership data that you asked for, Matt, would it be possible to just think about some benchmarks to increase ridership and then look at fare policy? Like, we'd like to increase rail ridership 50,000, et cetera, et cetera. And here's the tools that we think we can use to increase rail ridership and sustain and increase bus ridership. Now, I mean, that's a leap of faith, Tom, I know, given the fact we don't have, a software program or a methodology on the shelf. So I was just thinking of a benchmarking process, like a target for ridership, and then see what kind of fare policies would allow for the benchmarking to happen. Just another way of looking at this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bulger. Mr. Drummer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my discussion will be more macro than down in the weeds and the details, but I want to say thank you for the excellent array of concepts and considerations. I would consider them inputs and predicted outcomes. So I'm trusting that our focus is to be able to predict and project, to prepare and to respond with some degree of agility. And in one of the meetings in the past, Director Bulger and the general manager asked about scenarios. So my question is, we need decision support tools to help us get through this and maximize technology in doing so, because there are just so many moving parts here and so many variables: revenue, ridership, service levels, fares, economic developments, infrastructure developments, and then perhaps narrowing that down to by the entire system, by jurisdictions, by lines, by sectors and zones. I would believe that we do have some data from COVID, and we have data from our infrastructure projects to kind of develop some sensitivities of, if we made this decision, this may be the possible outcome. So my real question is decision support tools. Have we dug in? Are we very aggressive in looking for modeling and simulation tools to help us get here? Because we're going to need to be pretty agile in our responses. I don't think COVID is something that is going to go away. We have this COVID, there'll be something else coming down the pike. And our adversaries see this as an opportunity to influence what's happening in this country. I think we're going to see a lot, so we need to be agile. So my real question is, modeling and simulation tools, I'm kind of trusting that there is something out there that would help us pull all of these pieces and parts together, rather than just go trial and error and hope that we have predicted well.
So I very much appreciate the question, and it's something we talk about every day here. Unfortunately, the disruption that the pandemic has caused has broken every forecasting tool and model that we've used or that the industry's used. We are using every data point we can find to try to provide that decision structure and get as close as we can to a reasonable range of assumptions and scenarios. But the fact is, every model that's out there isn't sensitive enough for this level of disruption. That said, certainly, as the board's considering some of these options, we will assemble the best information we have and give you a sense of the range of potential outcomes, and move forward that way. To the extent that things become a little bit more predictable, that would be great. I'm not anticipating that in the near term, just because of how disruptive the last 18 months have been.
Okay, and I would just make one recommendation: consider perhaps partnering with some universities to perhaps dive into this, because you're right, it's going to be a very complex model or set of models that would be used. But if we don't do this, we're in continuous trial and error. But thank you so much. I appreciate the complexity and the challenge ahead of us.
Thank you, Mr. Drummer. I'll actually go to Ms. Helfer next. I think you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
There we go.
Just to plant some seeds for consideration as we think through the revenue piece and cost sharing. On the low income pilot that you're doing, I'd be interested, not right now, but in understanding how we might think about doing cost sharing with Medicaid for some of those low income rides. Medicaid does allow for non-emergency medical transportation. Transit passes are certainly one of those possibilities. And I wonder if there's any opportunity there to think a little more as an integrated strategy. And the second piece is on the paratransit piece, to kind of understand not the average, but there are people that use paratransit because they can't get to the bus or can't independently use the bus. And my question is $4 twice the fare of those bus fares? And if not, if there's people that are currently paying less, that we also take that into consideration. And then to somebody else's point that not everyone that uses paratransit, like not everyone that uses the bus, may need that fare support. Some people do, some people don't. So just the consideration that paratransit is meant to be complementary to our overall system. So thank you.
Thank you. And yes, that is correct. The $4 concept is 2 times the bus fare.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Chairman Spenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tom, I have a few comments, maybe a question or two along the way, but not in any particular order here. In regard to the bus, some of the proposals on the table, and particularly the dollar, flat fare. Just a word of caution here, and I know you're probably aware of this, but just to make sure others are as well, that this potentially could be problematic for the local systems, because many of them try to match or closely match what Metro is doing. So initially anyway, that could potentially be a big hit for the jurisdictions, particularly on the Virginia side, the way we're funded, where we contribute to Metro. That potentially could have a real hit on, the localities. So just a question there. In regard to the technology piece, I think that we have to start really taking the leadership role here and looking beyond just our own system and, looking at Smart Trip, and making sure we're integrated with VRE and MARC, down the road as, potentially as the region grows and people are, moving a little further out, but possibly, see some trends there and, still want to use Metro or use VRE and MARC to get to a certain point and then Metro to other places in the city or in other parts of our compact region. I want to pick up on something Sarah said about the principles, making sure that they're aspirational enough. I think one of the things that I heard from you and other Metro staff early on was the fact of, or the desire to get people using the system differently and getting more people on outside of the traditional commute, so to speak. And to that point, again, we don't know exactly what the new norm is going to be and what ridership levels are going to be, obviously, for a while yet. But I do think that there is some value in continuing to review the peak, non-peak, in terms of, as Secretary Slater said, sort of this trend of, simplifying, our fare structure. And even if we do go back to, high ridership at pre-pandemic levels. I still think there's value in looking at the peak and non-peak because I do think it would encourage even more ridership. I think down the road, maybe the zone issue should still potentially be on the table as we look but that's probably a little further down, a little further away. Again, this concept of the flat fare after 9 or 9:30, I think is something that we should definitely consider again as people begin to look at the system differently, and we have to look at a new model of how we do things and attract people. I think that is one way to hopefully get people on the system that maybe not wouldn't necessarily use it. We know that there is still potentially competition once we are back to some sort of normal from Uber and Lyft and other services. So I think we should still explore that. And the one concept that probably won't change is the fact that rail pays the bills, so to speak. So we've got to do everything we can to encourage that ridership. I definitely agree with the Secretary Slater and pass flexibility. We're hearing from folks already that their work schedules are going to be much different, and how flexible is that monthly pass going to be, or what kind of products could we put forward to accommodate their new schedules. The technology piece, I'm glad you're again mentioning that and acknowledging that. And then just the overall concept of making sure that we're doing all we can to integrate with our partners. I think they really do look to Metro for leadership, and I think there's a real desire to have integration here, short and long term. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Smedberg. I'll give a few comments, having had some discussion with my Virginia colleagues with the jurisdictions. One theme that sort of has come up with us is ensuring that our fare policy recognizes and captures riders using transit benefits, especially federal benefits, which is a huge part of our overall base, and ensuring we're continuing to be able to do that. I think we had quite a bit of support and interest in adjusting parking rates to maximize rail ridership. Although there is an impact potentially on local parking rates and surcharges, since I'll point out the Fairfax and Loudoun have built new stations, for instance, to support the Silver Line that they are operating. So we need to ensure some measure of consistent pricing. And in the case of the jurisdictions, a lot of the assumptions about the bonds they've taken out and so on are based on a certain level of return and daily charge. So we need to make sure that those are still in sync with where Metro is. I would echo the chairman's concern about the dollar Metrobus fare, particularly as it may relate to local systems, and also what Ms. Baber said about really being more targeted with that. And speaking of that targeting, I think we have some concerns on Metro being the one to go and try to enact a low or a discount fare structure. I think we're already down the path in some jurisdictions of doing that. I know the district has a pilot program. I know that some of our Virginia jurisdictions are working on this as well. And I just think it's administratively going to be a lot easier for the jurisdictions to do that than it is for Metro to try to do it system-wide. So I think that should be done at a jurisdictional basis. There was some concern as well on Metro Access flat fare, just given the costs associated with that. I am interested, and I would like to see analysis on the zone, sort of a zone concept. We'll call it kind of a hybrid of what we have now, a sort of a simplification of our distance-based structure where we potentially go to a couple of different zones. So I think that's something that should definitely be on the table as we continue to discuss this. I do want to maybe just explore the concept of simplification with you for a moment. Can you just kind of explain what exactly you see as the benefit to moving to that, and do you think that that could be something that increases ridership, or is it really just totally unrelated? Tom.
So, as I mentioned in the presentation, there's this balance between simplicity and complexity. To the extent that there were to be consideration of, say, eliminating the distance-based fare and charging flat fare all day, depending on where you set that price, it could increase ridership. It certainly simplifies the understanding for our customers of that pay-as-you-go price for each trip. There are obviously some crowding implications over the long term that would have to be considered. And then essentially be doing away with the element of our fare structure that charges people for the amount of the service that they're using, which adds complexity to it. So, there are other ways to simplify, of course, not just flat fares or standardizing fares. You can do that through passes, or the longer term concept that I described of fare capping, where somebody knows the maximum amount they're going to pay for a given time period. So some of it depends on how far you take that simplification. And then, of course, the price that you set things at is going to drive how many trips people take.
Yeah. Okay. I still think the jury's out a little bit on the peak versus off peak. As we look, this is really for the long term. I think as much as COVID is impacting us, this discussion is one that we would have had anyway. And so I'm personally not as convinced that we won't return to at least somewhat of a peak and non-peak sort of flow of our riders as more and more folks return to the office, and hopefully the Delta variant winds down. We don't know, obviously. But before sort of completely eliminating that, I would probably want to see more data and wait a little longer and kind of see where this is going. Because at the end of the day, I'll maybe go back to where I started, which is a concern on the revenue side. A lot of these concepts are attractive. They look attractive. I'm sure they would be popular with riders, but our most important responsibility is to ensure the system has the revenue it needs to continue to provide the service that we do. So, I want to make sure we're not going too far in the direction of going after ridership at the expense of revenue, because ultimately, we know we have some really big looming challenges, and I'm worried about the ability of our local governments and state governments to fill those gaps when they're coming. And I know we will have more discussion about that. So that's sort of looming over this discussion. So in terms of just next steps for the board, the fare policy principles that are on the screen now, you're going to be looking for more input on those, and then potentially for the board to adopt those at a future meeting?
Yes.
Okay. But next month, perhaps?
We're scheduled for next month, but of course, it's at the committee's discretion here.
Okay, so I would just encourage everyone to take kind of a closer look at those now that you've seen them and sort of seen these concepts. And, if you have any changes or thoughts about it, we can certainly communicate about that with staff or together as a board as we move to potentially adopt those principles. Let me just pause for a second, just make sure that there's no sort of follow-up questions that anyone has at this point. Looks like there is one from Ms. Klein.
I have one, and it just relates to the parking. Just a question for Tom. I know that in some garages there is a parking fare that is set for a parking fee that is set for riders, and then there's one that non-riders can pay, which is higher. Is that a Metro decision, or is that something the jurisdictions handle?
I think it's generally done in partnership with the jurisdictions, but it is a board pricing decision.
I would just encourage that to, as we consider ways of attracting riders through reducing parking fees, we think about whether there are other opportunities to perhaps raise revenue from other sources, including people who might want to use capacity at underutilized garages for non-metro related parking.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe just a note on that. We have a mix of garages that are owned by Metro and operated by Metro, and then those by the jurisdictions, particularly some of the newer ones. So that's kind of what I was referencing with, the jurisdictional ones that were built. They are serving Metro directly. They're adjacent to the Metro, the new Metro statements. But they were sort of based on what Metro is charging for parking elsewhere and their financial assumptions. And so I think we are going to have to work carefully with the jurisdictions if we make any changes there. But good question. Mr. Smedberg.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you made a really important point there at the end. While we all may have some different views on this, I think it's really important to understand that there are some short-term and long-term considerations, particularly as it relates to the financial standing of the authority. And anything we do always has to keep that top of mind, and that's our main responsibility here, obviously. And so I think that's really important to remind folks that we can't take any rash or sort of knee-jerk reactions to things or make quick decisions, because they will have long-term implications for sure. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Ms. Abers.
Thank you.
I saw you. I caught you.
Okay, thank you. I just had a quick question, because of course we are concerned about not only bringing back ridership, but making sure that revenue does not negatively get impacted to the point where we fall off a cliff. And so I should know the answer to this, but I have not quite read the legislation that created WMATA. But is there anything that prevents WMATA from transporting just people? I mean, can WMATA transport packages?
Ms. Babers, I think we'll have to get back to you on that with some specifics, unless our general counsel is on and has a quick answer to it.
Okay, and the only reason I bring it up is because I know that we've got Amazon that now engages a variety of entities to do the last mile movement of packages, and we may want to look at different avenues of revenue to make sure that we can continue to have a WMATA. So we want to think more out of the box, I believe.
I definitely appreciate that, and thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
All right. Okay. So with no further business to come before the committee, we will stand adjourned, and we'll move now to the Safety and Operations Committee, and I'll recognize the committee chair, Mr. Drummer.
Thank you, Mr. Letourneau, and welcome to today's Safety and Operations Committee. I'd like to consider the agenda as presented. Are there any objections? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. We also have the minutes from our last meeting on September 9th for approval. Are there any objections?
Yep.
Hearing none, we'll consider the minutes approved. So today we have two information updates on the agenda. The first is an overview of Metro's performance during fiscal year 2021. The Chief Operating Officer and Chief Safety Officer will report on key performance indicators for safety and service reliability. And after that, our strategy, planning, and program management staff will provide an update on the proposed Metrobus fleet strategy and draft fleet management plan. Now, some of this may be reviewed, as the draft plan includes the zero emissions bus policy we adopted. And later this year, the fleet plan will be brought back to the board for approval and submission to the Federal Transit Administration. Of note, Board Member Klein is recusing herself from the Metro Fleet Plan dialogue. Sorry. Again, Board Member Klein is recusing herself from the Metro Fleet Plan dialogue. When the item begins, she will drop from the committee meeting and rejoin the board of directors meeting. Now I'll turn the floor over to Chief Operating Officer Joe Leader.
Good morning, Chair Drummer, and to all the other directors that are on call. As you mentioned before, Teresa and Prasada will be joining me as we present the FY21 Metro performance, and I will try and share my screen right now. Do you see my presentation?
We do.
Okay, let me just make sure I can advance it. Okay, very good. All right, thank you. This is Joseph Leader, the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. Metro is providing the board with semi-annual reports on our FY21 performance against targets set for safety and service reliability key performance indicators. Metro has publicly reported performance for key operational measures since 2010. The KPIs in this report evaluate how well Metro is delivering our mission to provide safe, equitable, reliable, and cost-effective public transportation while meeting the standards the board has set for safety and service. The KPIs follow industry standard and align to the safety performance measures established in the FTA's National Public Transportation Safety Plan. This is the full report for all of FY21, covering the period from July of 2020 through June of 2021. Within Metro, this data is used on an ongoing basis to inform decision-making within operations. These measures are actively tracked by staff through a series of stat performance review meetings that encourage data-driven analysis and decision-making. This slide is basically the table of contents, slides 3 through 4. I will talk about the FY21 targets and performance. Slide 5, I will discuss ridership. Slides 6 through 10, safety and security. And 11 through 14, I will be discussing quality of service. In regards to FY21 performance targets, target setting was especially hard this year. The pandemic has impacted performance on almost all KPIs, and I will describe the impact throughout my presentation. Significant uncertainty about how long this pandemic would last, our ridership levels, our budget, and our service levels made it very difficult to establish baselines and performance bands. Nevertheless, the Metro Executive Management Team recognized that it was important to set targets to define success. So we took 3 approaches. One approach, we looked to aim for continuous improvements in some of our, our KPIs. Others, we looked to maintain the FY20 levels. And in 2 targets, which was ridership and crowding, we decided to set no target at all. Sorry. Targets for safety events, employee injuries, and bus and rail fleet reliability aim for continuous improvement over the prior year's performance. Given the uncertainty we face surrounding the operating budget, service levels in FY21, targets for on-time performance, elevator and escalator availability, customer injuries, and crime were kept at the FY20 performance levels. And again, we did not set targets for ridership and crowding. And just for the new board members, crowding was a new KPI we created in the height of the pandemic. We never really looked at crowding before. In FY21, I'm happy to say Metro met or exceeded all targets for all 20 key performance measures, including 11 safety and security measures and 9 quality service measures. The COVID-19 pandemic impacted Metro's KPIs across the board. The dramatic increase in ridership meant less wear and tear on the system assets, less street traffic, translated to fewer bus collisions, and fewer customers meant fewer injuries and less crowding, but we did see an increase in the rate of crime. In terms of ridership, total ridership was approximately 33% above initial budget forecast, driven by ridership on Metrobus. But ridership was down 65% when you looked at FY20 actuals. In a departure from historic trends, Metrobus ridership in FY21 exceeded Metro Rail ridership with almost twice as many Metrobus customers compared to Metro Rail customers. In FY21, Metro Rail ridership was 28.2 million, 22% below budget, but down 79% compared to FY20. In FY21, bus ridership was 52.1 million, 111% above budget, but down 46% when you looked at FY20. In terms of Part 1 crimes, crime met target. During FY21, Metro had 646 Part 1 crimes, about 54 crimes per month, meeting target of no more than 840 crimes. 70% of the crimes occurred on Metro Rail in FY21. Although this is the same result as FY20, rail ridership was down almost 80% in FY21 as compared to 46% of bus. The total number of crimes against property, which include theft, motor vehicle theft, arson, robbery, and burglary, fell by 50%. However, the number and the rate of crimes against persons, which includes assaults, homicides, and rapes, increased despite the drop in ridership from FY20 to FY21. This, unfortunately, is in line with the experience of other jurisdictions in the region. The only jurisdiction that saw a decrease in aggravated assaults and homicides was Fairfax County. Everybody else saw an increase similar to what we saw this prior year. And at this time, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Teresa, who will speak to the safety KPIs for FY21.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. With regard to customer injuries, the target for customer injuries set for FY21 accounts for anticipated ridership decreases relative to fiscal year 2020. This target aims to reach FY20 performance levels by the end of FY21. Customer injuries on all modes met the targets for FY21. As one would expect, with a sharp decrease in Metro ridership due to the pandemic, the overall number of injuries fell sharply compared to the prior year. However, when converted to a rate, we do see an increase. In fiscal year 2021, the main types of injuries continue to be slips, trips, and falls on the rail system and collisions on the bus system. Although we've had fewer of each of these injury types in FY21 when compared with FY20. Rail slips, trips, and falls that occurred due to crowding have dropped significantly as we have fewer customers in our stations at any given time. Bus and Metro Access customer injuries related to collisions have also dropped sharply, as less traffic regionally has resulted in fewer collisions and fewer collision-related injuries. That's not to say that Metro is not taking action to address all of these injury types. As noted in prior board briefings, actions to address these types of injuries include station modernization improvements to reduce hazards that result in slip, trip, fall, and train door injuries. And with regard to the bus system, we're investigating bus stop incidents to identify causal factors that result in customer injury and identifying intersections that are hotspots for collisions for additional observation by our field supervisors. As our Metro Access fleet incorporates sedans, we're also implementing related training on parking and assisting customers to maximize safety, as the methods used differ with vans versus sedans. Our Metro Access program also continues to engage in occupational therapists to address assistance-related injuries. Now we'll move on to talk about our employee injuries. Metro's employee injury target was set as a 5% improvement over the average employee injury rate over the past 3 years. Metro met target for both rail and bus employee injuries. As is typical among transit properties, bus employee injuries are higher than rail employee injuries. This is due to the nature of the work. Bus operators can be injured during collisions, which occur significantly more frequently on bus as their service is intermixed with vehicular traffic. Bus operators also directly engage with customers and, as such, have a higher rate of negative customer interactions that could result in an assault or stress claim. As with fiscal year 20, slips, trips, and falls are the most frequent type of injuries for rail, and collision-related injuries remain the most frequent type of injury for bus employees. Stress and assault injuries were the second most common type of injuries in fiscal year 21, and we saw a sharp uptick in these cases in quarters 3 and 4. On rail, some of the increase we believe to be related to a rise in suicide and psychological crises events. On bus, assaults frequently occurred when a Metro employee informed a passenger about a Metro policy, and they asked the passenger to comply with that policy. While the mask mandate and rear boarding accounted for some of these instances, they were not all of them. MTPD is assisting by offering de-escalation training and placing officers on routes with higher incidences of assault. Additionally, safety observations are being used to reinforce good behavior and to proactively identify and intervene to address unsafe behaviors. Next slide, please. With regard to reportable safety events, my screen appears to have been frozen. Oh, there we go. With regard to reportable safety events, apologies for the delay, the National Transit Database bus collision rate aims to achieve a 7.5% improvement over baseline 3-year average. I'm pleased to report that Metro met its target for NTD collisions in fiscal year 21. NTD collisions, as a reminder, are serious collisions, about 6% of all collisions in fiscal year 21 that Metro reports to the FTA. These collisions have resulted in customer or employee injuries requiring immediate medical attention away from the scene, removal of a vehicle due to disabling damage, or combined property damage greater than $25,000. We believe that less traffic, including from pedestrians and bicyclists during the pandemic, contributed to improvements in our overall collision rate. There were 104 NTD reportable bus collisions in fiscal year 2021. With regard to Metro Rail, targets for rail safety events that we report to the FTA were set to improve or decrease from the FY20 baseline. The targets shown in the graphs are for FY21. We've seen a huge improvement in rail safety events in fiscal year 21, with 25% fewer rail safety incidents than target. The pandemic is not solely driving better performance. These improvements hold even when we account for the lower service levels. When we scale to revenue miles, converting the rate of incidents per 10 million revenue miles, we still see a 13% decrease in the rate of derailments, a 67% decrease in the rate of collisions, and a 42% decrease in the rate of fires. Next slide, please. Continuing information with regard to our reportable safety event targets, the target for fire incidents was set to meet or improve upon fiscal year 25 or fiscal year 20 performance. We experienced 35 fire incidents in fiscal year 21, a decrease of almost 50%, almost half from FY20. These improvements were seen in both electrical and non-electrical fires, which decreased a significant percentage. We believe the stark decrease in non-electrical fires is related to decreased ridership associated with the pandemic, as the number of debris fires in stations and parking lots caused by combustible material, for example, trash accumulated in trash cans or in areas in the station, saw a decline. Insulator fire reductions are thanks to Metro's increase in track bed and drain cleaning, as well as efforts to install new thermoplastic insulators to reduce arcing events. Metro staff have used data to identify areas of the system most prone to electrical fires and have increased our frequency of cleaning there. With regard to red signal overruns, the target for red signal overruns was set to meet or improve upon fiscal year 20 performance. After implementing a strong response to the 10 red signal overruns that occurred during the first 6 months of fiscal year 21, I'm pleased to report that Metro only had 1 red signal violation during the second half of the fiscal year. Investigations that were conducted identified human factors, including failed compliance and communications, as the root causes of events. In response, Metro conducted safety stand-downs to review the incidents and proper procedure, as well as initiating computer-based training on moving trains without speed commands. Additional initiatives are underway, including the development of a point-and-call procedure for train operators to call out signal states as they approach them, and the installation and expansion of stop and proceed software on rail cars. With that, I'd like to turn it back to Mr. Leader, who will review our on-time performance.
Teresa, thank you for reporting out on our safety KPIs. In regards to on-time performance, the My Trip Time target was kept at FY20 levels, 88%. In FY21, I'm pleased to say that Metro customers completed 91% of their trips on time, exceeding the target of 88%, an improvement over FY20 and FY19. The strong performance is in part driven by strong railcar reliability, rail transportation and control staff continuing to focus on schedules, and the state of good repair programs for track, signal, switches, track circuits, and power that are key to sustaining these high levels of performance. In terms of Metro access, this target was held at the FY20 performance level of 90%. Performance greatly exceeded the target, and the less traffic, reduced ridership, and the elimination of shared rides have had a strong push to getting us at a very high on-time performance. In terms of Metro Bus on-time performance, the target was set at 75%, which was the average at the height of the pandemic between July and August of 2020. Metro Bus met its target of 75% on-time performance for FY21. It is important to note that in the first 8 months of the financial year, Metro Bus was running early due to schedules. And when you run early, that goes against your on-time performance. And that was because we were changing the schedule so often, we weren't able to come up with new run times. But in the March 15th pick, we were able to change the schedules, and that reduced some of the running times. And since then, Metro Bus has been running about 78% on-time performance. In terms of fleet reliability, targets for both bus and rail fleet reliability aim for continuous improvement. Rail's performance is a 7% improvement over a 3-year average, and bus is a 13% improvement over the same 3-year average. Both the bus and the rail fleet achieved record reliability levels in FY21. In terms of rail MDBF, rail fleet reliability was driven by the strong performance of the 7000 series, which averaged over 41,500 miles between failure and represents over 75% of the total mileage accumulated by the fleet. The 2000 and the 3000 series, which are about 35 years old and approaching the end of their useful life, performed at 8,400 and 10,200 miles between failure, respectively. Staff continues to conduct preventive maintenance and inspections and use reliability analysis to address failures. In terms of bus fleet MDBF, bus fleet reliability was incredibly strong in FY21 at 9,150 miles between failure, far exceeding the target of 7,000. Performance was driven by the CNG fleet, which is 27% of the miles traveled, that achieved over 11,000 miles between failure. The hybrid buses, which make up about 65% of the miles traveled, achieved 8,565 miles between failure. And even the clean diesel buses, which only make up 8% of the miles traveled, almost doubled their FY20 performance with 8,714 miles between failure. In terms of Metro access, Fleet reliability had a strong performance in FY21 at 23,951 miles, exceeding the target of 20,000 miles. In accordance with the Metro Access Fleet Plan, 187 aging fleet transit vehicles were retired and 177 new sedans were commissioned during the financial. Okay, in terms of asset availability, and this is a KPI that was defined by the FTA. So just to give the board members a sense of what it is, it's a snapshot in time, Wednesday at 9 o'clock. They ask all agencies that have a rail property to report out what percentage of your tracks are under some form of a restriction. So available track follows the FTA guidance for measuring guideway conditions. The target sets reflects Metro's projections for planned and unplanned outages throughout the year. In FY21, 5.3% of the track was under a performance restriction. That was 2.5% percentage points below the FY21 predictions. And what I would like to say is the majority of the tracks that are under a restriction are due to our capital project. It's not due to unplanned work. So that's a good thing that we know in advance where, how much of a percentage of our tracks will be out of service due to the capital work. Performance was better than anticipated due to fewer conditions-related restrictions, early completions of capital projects, and the adjustment of plans, particularly related to the stalled Purple Line construction project that was pushed off. In terms of elevator and escalator availability, we set to maintain FY20 levels. At any given time across the financial year, about 2% of our elevators were out of service, equivalent to about 5 or 6 elevators out of the total of 275 units across the system. Elevators were available for use 98% of the time, meeting target and improving by 1 percentage point as compared to FY20. At any given time, about 5% of our escalators were out of service, equivalent to roughly about 30 of the 600 units across the system. Elevators were available for use 95% of the time, exceeding target by 3 percentage points and staying consistent with FY20 performance. And what should be noted for the board members, when we take a unit out of service for capital work, that goes against our availability. So those numbers are true when it comes to the system. And in fact, that KPI is a lot of agencies don't do it that way. They eliminate what you have out for capital improvement, but we include it inside the availability. And if you could go to the next slide. And finally, crowding on bus and rail is closely monitored by staff. And as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, this is a new KPI we just started during the height of the pandemic. We look at no more than 23 passengers on a rail car as being crowded, no more than 20 passengers per bus as being crowded. We adjusted these thresholds in late June 2021 in line with the CDC and the local jurisdictions guidelines that de-emphasized the need for social distancing because now people were able to wear masks. We did not set any targets for these measures. Throughout the year, Metro provided 80 to 85% of pre-pandemic service levels. This allowed us to sustain very low levels of crowding. Our new service plan that began on September 5th added more buses and trains and extended Metro Rail's operating hours. So there's even though we have more people in our system, there really isn't any crowding in our system. And with that, that's the end of our presentation on our performance for FY21. I'll take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Leader and Mr. Impastato. We can use the raise hand function and I'll acknowledge any questions and comments. Director Babers.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Joe and Teresa, this great report. I mean, I enjoyed reading it as a Metro board member. It really does show, all the hard work that all of the Metro employees have been doing throughout the FY21. So the only comment that I have, because thank you, Joe, you really answered you answered one of them, and that was I was trying to figure out if that asset availability did include your capital projects and preventive maintenance. So I do appreciate you clarifying that several times, because the numbers now are even better looking.
Mhm.
But my question is, and I guess maybe Joe, this is for you. What kind of impact has the shortage of commercial driver's license drivers had on you all hiring for bus drivers?
Well, even before the pandemic, I can honestly say we started to see the class size for bus operators to go down. And during the pandemic, we did actually go into a hiring freeze because we were not sure what levels of service that we were going to provide, and we didn't want to bring new people on. And then, if we fell off the cliff and had to lay them off. We are starting to see this year right now, we're starting to see the class sizes go back up. So I think we will be in good shape when it comes to it. I know from the school bus side, they're having a lot of difficulty, but I'm starting to see the class sizes get up, not to where I would like to be. I would like to see 35, 40 bus operators per class, but we are starting to see that rise.
Okay, great. And you're not seeing any poaching like from the school systems that are trying to get bus drivers?
No, I haven't been alerted to any of that. In fact, what we constantly look at is our salary, our wages, and what we can do to entice people to come onto the property. So like Silver Line Phase 2, we hired a third party to help us, and I understand there's a large pipeline of people, going through their background checks and their medical. So I'm looking forward to filling those positions as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I see a hand, but I don't have visibility on who it is.
I believe it was Mr. Letourneau, Director Letourneau.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I had the same issue. I understand. Yeah, I just want to go to the crime discussion a little bit. I'm concerned about this, and in some cases, perception is reality. And so, if for all the work that we're doing to try to increase ridership and the discussions we're having about fares, if people perceive that Metro is not safe to ride, they won't ride it. They'll find other ways to get where they're going. And so, I know that we had put some ideas on the table to address this that received a lot of pushback. I thought it was disappointing, the lack of focus on the actual crimes that were being committed and the victims that we had, rather than, I think, a misplaced concern about certain other issues. But be that as it may, I would really encourage our management, our interim chief of police, and others to continue to brainstorm ways to try to address this, because seeing this level of crime with ridership as low as it is, I think creates a perception and a reality of safety concern. So I don't know if you want to comment any further on that, but I just want to make sure the board keeps its focus on this issue, even though we've had some challenges trying to address it so far.
Yeah, no, I would comment. I can tell you, when I first got here, Metro staff was the stat meeting at the police department reviewed on a monthly basis crime, where it was occurring, and how to respond with resources. We've gone to weekly meetings now addressing crime. And the other thing we're doing is we've taken what we used to use on the bus side, which we call heights, which would be putting a number of officers there for visibility. We've now entered that into the rail system. Instead of just placing one or two officers, we're placing more officers at times based on where the crime data is telling us to focus on. So we do a very good job of tracking where the crime is, what the crime is. We also are working with the jurisdictional partners to find out where their crime is, because sometimes we could push crime out of our system into their system or vice versa. So we are working with the jurisdictions and learning from them as well.
Mr. Chairman, this is Paul Wiedefeld, if I may.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I also think that it's a broader discussion, Matt, because during COVID, a lot of the safety net for a lot of issues, just the support systems weren't there. And this is, I've been talking to my counterparts at other major transit properties throughout the country, and we're all wrestling with this issue. Part of it was as ridership went down, certain things started to evolve in the system. So that is something we're also focusing on, just the overall quality, the feel of the system. And again, it's something that, I think you've probably seen as you've just, in the community in general, right? There's some things that, again, there were support services that just weren't offered, and these people still need that support. But some of that then plays out in the system. So we got to really focus on that. I know it's a concern of our customers, obviously, of the jurisdictions. But I have been working with other properties around the country to see some of the things they're doing to try to, increase, sort of the comfort level that people have using the system. Clearly, the crime is the number one. But I think there's just a general feel that we've got to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make everyone feel comfortable using the system.
Thank you.
Chair Smedberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree. I agree with Deputy Mayor Babers that, this overall was, a very interesting read, and it was encouraged by a lot of what I saw in here. But, that crime slide did obviously stick out. So, Mr. Wiedefeld, it is encouraging to hear those words and that we're looking at ways to address this. And continued attention, because I just, Mr. Letourneau said, people do want a safe, reliable system, and this is obviously key to that. So thank you for the efforts in this area and the continued attention on this, because it is important that we have a safe system.
Thank you. Mr. Leader, if you can help me identify the hand that's raised, I can't see.
I believe it's Director Klein.
I think that was me, yes.
Go ahead, Director Klein.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Leader, thank you so much for that presentation. It was very helpful to see a snapshot of so many elements of the operations, and I was particularly impressed with the Metro Access performance in terms of on time. That culture of continuous improvement that you've talked about, I think, is really important, and hopefully that can continue. One place that I had a question about, though, was actually with Metrobus reliability. I saw that the target, I think I heard you say that the target of 75% on-time rate was set based on the average on-time performance from the previous year. And I'm wondering if you're kind of setting a target based on a current rate, how that encourages continuous improvement.
We normally go with continuous improvement. What we were struggling with when we had to set the target, we were in the middle of the pandemic and we just didn't know. So what we looked at was, because we looked at the first 2 months when we were really in the height of the pandemic to see what we were kind of running with, and we set it on that. Going forward, this year we're looking at setting the target at around 78% for FY22. So we went back to actually an improvement over or a higher target based on where we were back in like FY19 and FY20. So we look to improve that. What's difficult on the bus side is, again, we just don't control the traffic. And so what we can control is making sure that we start on time, that we run, not early. We run as close to schedule as possible. And then what we're trying to do is really have our supervisors look at the routes that are having some difficulty, and then trying to understand what it is. Is it something we can work with the jurisdictions with, or is it something that we need to work with scheduling with? And that's how we kind of, try and improve when it comes to bus.
Great, thank you for that. I thought it might be something pandemic related, so I just wanted to get a little further clarification. And I do really appreciate that many of the factors contributing to reliability are not directly within your control or the control of the operator. So thanks very much. Thanks,
No.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I don't see any other hands. Tom, do you have any? I'm sorry. Joe, do you have anything else you want to share?
No, I'm good. Thank you so much, and I appreciate the time.
Absolutely. At this point, we'll transition to the Metro Fleet Plan. Mr. Tom Webster and Kit Conway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going to pull up the presentation.
Good morning again, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Again, I'm Tom Webster, Executive Vice President for Strategy Planning and Program Management. Over the past year or so, the board has had several in-depth discussions reviewing and considering options for the future of Metrobus and the fleet and our facilities. And in June, the board approved goals for a transition to zero-emission buses. Those goals are that all new purchases will be all zero-emission by 2030, and that the entire fleet will be zero-emission by 2045. And that there'd be a transition period over the next decade where Metro would purchase all low or no emission buses, starting with our next procurement. And low emission buses would include CNG and hybrid buses, but not diesel buses. So today we're sharing an update on the broader fleet plan that incorporates these board adopted goals from this summer. This item today is an information item to preview the plan. Our goal is to have an updated bus fleet plan adopted by the board and submitted to the Federal Transit Administration later this year. And as we start that procurement process for our next bus order. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kit Conway, who is our staff lead for this strategy and plan to run through the presentation. Kit?
Thank you, Tom. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, as Tom mentioned, the purpose of this presentation is to offer an update on the key conclusions of the draft Metrobus Fleet Management Plan, which factor in the board adopted goals for a zero emission bus fleet. I will outline the context of the overall fleet plan, the highlights of the draft strategy, and review next steps coming out of this board meeting. Fleet plans are important planning documents which are updated periodically to align anticipated service levels, fleet needs, facility requirements, and bus procurements. While today's discussion relates to the Metrobus fleet, Metro also prepares fleet plans for its rail and Metro Access services. After board adoption, the fleet plan will be submitted to the Federal Transit Administration. And as Tom noted, this updated Metrobus fleet management plan is consistent with board adopted zero emission vehicle goals. The purpose of a fleet plan is to answer 4 key questions. First is what level of service Metro expects to supply in the future. Second is how many buses Metro should operate to meet demand and service requirements. Third is what types of buses Metro should operate, which includes what type of propulsion technology, such as diesel, hybrid, CNG, electric, or something else. But it also includes the length of those buses. So they could be standard 40-foot buses, 60-foot articulated buses, and also they could be shorter than 40 feet as well. And the final question is how Metro's maintenance facilities and operations will meet those evolving fleet needs over time. Metro currently operates 10 bus divisions throughout the region, where buses are commissioned, stored, maintained, and overhauled. Northern Bus Garage is currently undergoing reconstruction, as is Bladensburg, though Bladensburg remains open and operating during that reconstruction period. Different Metrobus operating divisions offer different support capabilities. This impacts where buses may be stored and maintained depending on their fuel type. For example, only certain operating divisions can support CNG vehicles, as well as length. The maintenance and storage capacity for articulated buses, those requirements are different than standard vehicles. An important question on everyone's mind is how ridership is recovering in the COVID-19 pandemic and how we expect it to recover in the future. I'll note that the Metrobus Fleet Management Plan is a long-range planning document, which includes projections for ridership through 2038. And despite the impact from the COVID-19 pandemic, bus ridership has already turned to approximately 60% of pre-pandemic levels. There is some uncertainty in the timing of near-term ridership recovery, though we do anticipate eventual full recovery. This ridership forecast integrates National Capital Region Transportation Planning Board regional forecasts for land use, population, and employment growth, all of which affect transit ridership. And these estimates can be and will be revisited in coming years and updated to reflect ridership trends as they actually occur. A key question of the fleet plan, as I mentioned, is how many buses Metro expects to operate in the fleet. This is driven primarily by anticipated service levels. Metro expects to maintain a fleet size of approximately 1,593 buses, which will be required to sustain a return to pre-pandemic service levels and accommodate existing and anticipated crowding over time. 1,270 of these vehicles will be operated in maximum service on a typical weekday peak. 248 of them will be spare vehicles, which support maintenance requirements, midlife overhauls, and other training and special project needs. And finally, 75 of them are projected to be ready reserve vehicles, older vehicles suitable for use as needed. These will enable improved continuity of service, especially as Metro begins deploying new propulsion technologies in the coming years. In light of the board-adopted zero-emission vehicle goals, this chart outlines the anticipated procurement of electric and other zero-emission vehicles, beginning with Metro's next bus procurement in fiscal year 2024. So beginning in fiscal year 2024, we expect approximately 1/4 of our new bus purchases to be electric vehicles. And by 2030, we expect them to be, or planning for them to be 100% zero emission. In the near term, we expect zero emission vehicles to be battery electric, which is a subcategory of zero emission, but we will remain flexible in the future as other technologies improve and we continue to evaluate them. Metro plans to use a phased approach to electric bus adoption, with only lower emission and zero emission vehicles in the next bus procurement. And this strategy emphasizes flexibility and adaptability, with the potential for faster adoption of electric or other zero emission buses if one-for-one replacement of conventional vehicles is possible sooner, more funding is available, or facility capacity and infrastructure improvements are realized more quickly. And so what I want to emphasize here is that what you see is our plan as sort of a baseline. But if we find in early deployments and through our test and evaluation of electric buses that we can move more quickly and add electric buses to the fleet more rapidly than what you see here, that is something that we certainly will do. I'll also note that the critical path here is really the facility capacity and infrastructure required to support electric buses. Metro also plans to expand the share of its bus fleet, which is 60-foot articulated vehicles, up from 4%, which it is today, to 12%, or approximately 180 buses. This would enable Metro to respond to crowding and service standards, including routes with anticipated ridership demand growth, without an increase in the overall fleet size. It is also consistent with previous bus garage storage and maintenance capacity investments, so we're taking advantage of that work that's already been done, as well as a survey of fleet compositions at peer transit agencies. To summarize the strategy, Metro expects to maintain a fleet size of approximately 1,593 buses, procuring 100 new vehicles per year. We will begin the adoption of electric buses, starting with our next bus procurement, and to transition new bus procurements to be 100% electric or other zero-emission technologies by 2030, and realize a fully zero-emission fleet by 2045. We will grow articulated buses as a share of the fleet, and we also expect to adopt a spare ratio of 19.5%, updated from the current 18.5%, to support bus technology transition, the increase in articulated buses, reduce garage and fleet flexibility, and increase capital program support needs for programs such as the Platform Improvement Project. This proposed spare ratio remains within FCA guidelines. As next steps, the Metro Board of Directors has the opportunity to review the draft Metrobus Fleet Management Plan for adoption in the second quarter of fiscal year 2022. The upcoming bus procurement contract will be initiated in fiscal year 2022, with deliveries expected to begin in fiscal year 24. And Metro staff will be developing an electric bus facilities investment plan to further detail the delivery of electric bus support and infrastructure. And thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Tom and Kit. And if you would use the raise hand function, I'll acknowledge you. I don't see any questions.
Actually, there's one.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Helfer.
And hi, I apologize if you covered this and I missed it. But just two questions. One is on the procurement. Is there do we cooperate or coordinate with other systems as they're putting through their procurement to get kind of bulk buy? That's first question. And the second is charging stations. Will they just be at the storing facilities, or will there be other charging stations built into the infrastructure throughout the city?
Thank you for the questions. On the first question of whether we do sort of cooperative purchase agreements to get any sort of bulk pricing, I'm not sure. So I would like to get back to you on that if I could. I believe that we typically run our own bus procurements independent of other regional providers, but I can get back to you on that. And as far as the second question on charging infrastructure, that is to be determined. There's multiple ways you can charge a bus. You can charge it at the depot itself. You can do on-route charging, and you can also do sort of inductive charging, which is something that comes up from the ground below. Our exact plan for charging infrastructure is currently being developed.
Thank you, Kit. Let me jump in on that first one. I think Metro is one of the larger procurers of buses in the country. As we've been developing and planning for this electric bus procurement, we have reached out to our local bus partners and will be looking for partnership opportunities from both a procurement standpoint and obviously in the development of facilities and other things. So while we haven't typically done partnership agreements, to my knowledge, there's certainly opportunities as we move into this new space to partner with our local bus providers. So thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer, you could help me identify. Oh, I see. Mr. Letourneau? Yeah, just a quick question, just to be crystal clear. So we are increasing the number of spares by like 1.5%. Is that basically because electric buses to date are less reliable and we're probably going to need more spares?
Yes, we expect a period of transition as electric bus technology continues to improve. We think that there will be a slight need for more spares available. I will also note that articulated bus maintenance and overhauls can be a little bit more complicated, and so giving a little bit of flexibility there is also a good idea. I will also note that the increase you see there, which I think is 1% from 18.5 to 19.5, that comes out to something like 13 buses. So it may seem large, but it's not a large increase.
Yeah. Okay. My only other comment is just we are really going to have to work out the costs associated with all that infrastructure upgrade that you referenced. What our plan is. I've always said this is going to have to be a conversation with our regional and funding partners because it is a significant cost. And I think it's something that most of them want us to do. And in some cases, apparently want us to do faster than we are. But there's certainly a cost associated with that. And WMATA is going to have to work that out to be able to move even at the pace that we've outlined. Is going to require a lot of infrastructure upgrades and expense. So, thank you.
Thank you. I see no additional raised hands. Okay, thank you again. And with no further business to come before this committee, we stand adjourned and the Board of Directors meeting will begin shortly.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Paul Smedberg, Chair of the WMATA Board. Thank you for being here today for our Board of Directors meeting. Before we begin, I'll ask Ms. Ellison, the Board Corporate Secretary, to please call the roll. Ms. Ellison.
Thank you. Chair Smedberg,
Present.
Vice Chair Babers,
Present.
Vice Chair Slater,
Present.
Director Klein,
Present.
Director Letourneau,
Present.
Alternate Director Bolger,
Present.
Director Drummer,
Present.
and Alternate Director Helfer. I think you're on mute.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. Our first order of business is to approve the agenda. If there are no objections, I'd like to consider the agenda as approved as presented. Are there any objections or comments on the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Next, we will have approval of the minutes. We have 5 sets of minutes for approval. The July 29th, 2021 board meeting, the September 9th, 2021 special board meeting, the July 28th, 2021 executive session, the July 29th, 2021 executive session, and the September 9th, 2021 executive session. I'd like to consider these minutes approved as presented. Are there any objections or comments on any set of those minutes? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Ms. Ellison, do we have some noted abstentions with Ms. Klein and Dr. Helfer?
No, they're not required to abstain. So
Okay.
they're.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now for the public comment period and reports from our advisory bodies. First, we will hear from our customers and stakeholders who submitted comments for the board. There were 130 public comments submitted, 86 of which were identical. So we will read the comment and list the names of the people who submitted it.
As noted, we had 84 residents from the District of Columbia from DMV who pretty much had a comment template. So I'm going to read the first slide, and this is pretty much verbatim for the 84 that will be listed on the next slide. Comments begin. I am urging the WMATA board to vote no on the current proposal to ban certain riders who are accused of committing certain crimes on WMATA property. This rule will expand police power, handing more control over to a force that has proven time and time again that they do not keep us safe. This rule would also be enforced inequitably. We know that a disproportionate number of those arrested in DC are Black, and this rule would only further discrimination against people of color, but especially Black people living in the DMV area. In addition, this will cut off vital access to those who need it most. Those who ride the Metro Rail or bus may have no other means of getting around the city. Anything from going to see a sick relative or to simply going to work would suddenly be criminalized behavior under this new rule. Lastly, there are many concerns around due process in this rule. The person would only have to be accused of a crime for them to be deprived of liberty, not convicted in a court of law by a jury of their peers, which is their constitutional right. So as a concerned citizen of the DMV, I'm demanding that the board vote no today on this new proposal. And listed are the 84 residents who pretty much had a template for these comments.
Our next comment is from Abigail DeRoberts from the District of Columbia. I'm a Ward 5 resident and have been using the Metro since I was a teenager. There are so many of the new affordability and service changes that I applaud. Lowering the weekend rate to $2 per direction, easing bus transfers, and increasing train frequency. However, I am so heartbroken that Metro would consider blocking those accused of certain crimes from using the service. This is public transportation, supported by our dollars, not only when we ride, but also our tax dollars paid by everyone. Therefore, it should be designed with the entire public in mind and not just prioritizing commuters and tourists. We know that being accused of a crime in the US and the District of Columbia is often laden with racial bias. Subconscious biases cause police to criminalize and charge certain people more than others. So we know this new rule would have a racial bias. This is unacceptable. Please use your critical thinking and do not block anyone from riding Metro.
Hello, I support WMATA's proposal to bar people from Metro who have been arrested for sexually harassing other riders or carrying weapons on buses and subway trains. The timeframes for suspensions are reasonable, and you are also offering an opportunity for people to appeal. Research shows that a swift and certain punishment is more effective at changing behavior than an uncertain and delayed punishment. This is similar to administrative license suspensions when a driver has been detected as driving while impaired by alcohol.
Good evening. My name is Diego. I live in Washington, D.C. I'm calling to implore the City Council to vote no on WMATA's proposal, or on the WMATA proposal that's on the table for vote tomorrow for a variety of reasons, but primarily because it provides Metro Transit Police far too much discretion to target certain kinds of individuals who fit the vague profile outlined in the proposal, because it's very difficult to have a perfect ID match of somebody. This will invariably target Black and brown people who just want to get to work or just need to ride the Metro for whatever reason. There should be no higher burden for somebody to ride the Metro just because of their skin color, their height, their age. And this proposal will absolutely do that. So for that reason, I implore the board to vote no and to not encourage further discrimination to Metro Transit riders. Thank you.
The next comment is from Jessica Emerson from the Human Trafficking Prevention Project at the University of Baltimore School of Law. The Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, WMATA, issued a press release this month stating, quote, the Metro Board of Directors Safety and Operations Committee approved a proposal to suspend access to Metro Rail and Metrobus for those arrested for sex and weapons related offenses within the system, end quote. The Human Trafficking Prevention Project at the University of Baltimore School of Law has several concerns about the policy change that would allow for suspensions from access to the Metrorail and Metrobus for up to 1 year for individuals who are arrested for sex-related offenses on Metro property. WMATA has stated that this is an effort to increase rider safety and to address an increase in sex-related offenses on the Metro, including indecent exposure. There appears, however, to be very little oversight of this process and a real potential to violate the civil rights of individuals during enforcement. The broad and undefined new language invites excessive discretionary policing, increased racial profiling, and will likely result in an uneven application of the rules, particularly when it comes to women of color and trans women of color who comprise the majority of the HTPP's client population. Similar to the recently repealed New York state law allowing police to arrest individuals, quote, suspected of soliciting for prostitution, if a WMATA security officer sees an individual who is wearing clothing or acting in a manner that they deem too inappropriate, they can be arrested and receive a ban. The policy may also impact individuals who trade sex for survival, including those who are doing so because they are under the control of a trafficker. As Carol Bernard, the executive director of the DC-based anti-trafficking organization Amara Legal Center states, this policy will have a disparate impact upon both sex workers and sex trafficking survivors. Sex-related offenses include solicitation, meaning that if individuals are soliciting for sex work, whether or not it's of their own volition, or even suspected of soliciting, they can receive a ban. The undefined, quote, sex-related offense also places no import on the intent of the offense. Thus, the individual who is arrested for urinating and the individual arrested for intentionally exposing themselves to another are treated equally. This will likely have a disparate impact on individuals with mental health challenges who should not be suspended or banned from public transportation when they did not possess the requisite intents to harass the individual who witnessed the exposure. This reaches the 2-minute period of comment, so the rest of the comments will be posted online.
Next set of comments from Sherelle Davis in PG County, Maryland. I am constantly harassed and do not feel safe at all riding the train to get to work Monday through Friday. I catch a train from Southern Avenue to LaFont Plaza and get on the blue or orange line to get to my final stop, which is Farragut West. I am always on high alert and have to watch my back because of that. I do not feel protected on a train, and there needs to be more transit police around. Today I experienced something that really made me nervous and anxious, and I had to restrain from reacting because I was afraid that I would be physically harmed. I was on the blue line from LaFont Plaza around 7:30, 7:35 a.m. on August 30th, and a black guy with his mask pulled down walked over to me and he asked me for money for food. I politely told him no, I did not have anything, and put my headphones back in. He continued to speak to me and showed me his gunshot wound for what I don't know. After showing me his gunshot wound, he asked me for money again, and I had to raise my voice a little so that he would walk away. I told him once again I do not have any money. He went off and got loud, saying that if he was a female, I would have given it to him, and I didn't give him anything because he is a black man. Mind you, I'm a black woman. He walked a couple of steps further ahead of me, standing by the door right in front of me, and he stared me down, and I stared back at him for about 30 seconds. He is talking crazy at this point, but I can't make it out what he is saying. He loudly yells, what the F are you looking at me? I'm not the only one of your kids, as he is walking towards me and past me. I really had to be on high alert now because he is behind and this man has nothing to lose. Why wouldn't I feel like I need to protect myself? He starts yelling and he starts yelling that he hates bitches, especially black bitches, and black bitches ain't good for nothing. I'll leave that there. And we were at our 2-minute stop.
Next is from Valerie Wexler from the District of Columbia. I am a resident of Ward 6 and frequent Metro rider. I am incredibly concerned about the proposed rule that would suspend access to Metro Rail and Metrobus to those arrested, not even convicted, for sex and weapons-related offenses. This is a clear violation of DC residents' rights to freedom of movement. As noted by the ACLU, this rule means that people, quote, could be banned from public transit based solely on an accusation by an MTPD officer, with no judge, jury, or trial. If this rule goes into effect, DC residents could be banned from their only means of transportation, left with no access to their workplace, to school, to doctor's appointments, or the grocery store. Even attempting to appeal the ban would mean having to go 2 weeks without access to transportation. Harassment and harm on metro trains and buses should be taken seriously. However, this is not the way to address it. Giving an already abusive police force the power to arbitrarily ban whoever they want will only cause more harm and disproportionately affect Black DC residents. I urge the board to vote no on this misguided and harmful proposal.
My name is Steve Chang. I live in Columbia Heights. I would like the board to vote no on the proposal to disallow people with criminal records on the metro system. Yeah, I think it's an awful proposal. It's limiting, and how are these people supposed to live their lives afterwards? It's absolutely ridiculous. Thank you.
Next set of comments from Geoff Gilbert of the District of Columbia. Dear Metro Board of Directors, I'm writing to ask you to vote no on the proposal to expand police power and allow the Metro to ban riders who are accused of certain criminalized actions. Access to using the Metro is crucial for so many people to get to work, especially people who are most marginalized within our city and DMV region's economy. Poor working class people who are disproportionately Black or Latinx and women, trans people, or gender non-conforming people. I believe that increases in safety that are needed on the Metro. I don't believe this is the way. I believe this proposal will only serve to further marginalize the most marginalized people within our city and the DMV region. I ask, please consider other paths for increasing safety on the Metro.
Next is from Abel Amene from the District of Columbia. I am one of the many people in the DC area who regularly ride Metrobus and Metrorail, and I have a personal and firsthand understanding of what it means to be safe while riding Metro. I am writing to ask that you vote no on the current proposal to suspend or ban users after certain arrests. This proposal, updates to WMATA tariff ridership rules and guidelines, will not make us safer, it will not make Metro safer, and it will not deter purported criminalized behaviors. It will only expand police control and increase harm. There are significant due process concerns with taking away our access to a critical service like public transit, especially when someone has only been accused of a crime, not convicted. Such an action would be an infringement on our rights, and the ACLU of DC has expressed clear reasons why this is a violation of civil liberties. In addition, expansions of police power leads to abuses, and we have seen this time and time again. Metro Transit Police already lacks adequate oversight, and this expansion would almost certainly perpetuate harmful stop and frisk practices and excessive use of force, particularly for marginalized communities already subject to unequal policing. We should be seeking ways to reduce police interventions and opportunities for misconduct, not increase them. Rather than creating new ways to criminalize riders, I instead urge you to increase oversight of Metro Transit Police. The agency already has a long history of harm without accountability. As a Metro rider and someone invested in the safety of everyone in our communities, I am much more concerned about the potential for police misconduct than my fellow riders. Please respect our rights, remain committed to eliminating police interventions and opportunities for misconduct, and ensure Metro remains accessible to everyone by voting no on this proposal. Thank you for your time and attention to this matter.
And the last set of comments for now, because we're running out of time here, Elizabeth Sloud from the District of Columbia. I would like to urge the board to reject the proposed updates to the WMATA tariff on ridership rules and guidance for passenger conduct. This update, while worded to sound like it's meant to protect customer and employee safety, is in function and elimination of due processes. The proposed updates allow WMATA to unilaterally suspend a person from using the Metro simply for being arrested, not convicted for a sex-related crime or crime involving a firearm, dangerous weapon. As written, simply being suspected of a crime and arrested without conviction would be enough to remove you from possibly your only means for getting to work. Please consider the broader implications of this proposal and its context in the reality of the situation. Who would be affected most, and if it's truly valuing the well-being of all riders. Although we like to think there's a clean-cut line between good and bad people, placing this kind of judiciary power in the hand of police is just reinforcing a flawed justice system that we know is already crippled by systematic racism. There is a huge difference between creating a policy around someone convicted of a crime versus arrested. Thank you for your time, and I hope you consider my comments. Regards, Elizabeth. That concludes our comments for today. We will be posting the rest of the comments on the website.
Thank you. The ones that we could not get to today, we will, as has just been stated, we will get to, we'll have them posted on the website. So thank you for everyone's comments. And as information, the board will not be considering the tariff amendment proposal to suspend people who engage in sex or sex-related crimes and or crimes involving a firearm or dangerous weapon while on Metro property. So please note that we will monitor the effectiveness of similar initiatives in other regions before rescheduling the matter for action at a future date. Next, we'll hear from our Accessibility Advisory Committee Chair, Phil Posner. Good morning, Phil.
Good morning.
How are you?
The Accessibility Advisory Committee hopes the members of the board had a happy and safe summer break and were in fact prepared for an incredibly long day today. Hopefully everybody's neurons and synapses are still functioning well. The special board meeting on September 9th was exciting for the AAC as 3 new female members with transit as well as community experience were appointed to fill vacancies. We will miss the community advocacy of Ms. Gidby Jenkins and Mr. Goldman. But looking at their histories, Ms. Klein, Ms. Martin Proctor, and Ms. Helfer should be strong advocates for the elderly and disability communities as WMATA moves forward, implementing its new equity-based policies for fares and service during recovery and back to normal. We would love to have the new members, as well as any and all of the existing members, visit with us at any of our meetings and or chat with any of our members, constituents from jurisdictions. Our committee is made up of members from all 3 jurisdictions, also members that are retired, unemployed, federal employees, have subsidized travel, do not have subsidized travel, are active in the community. So I think when you visit, you will find it's fun to talk to us. Our August was a working holiday, as we joined you in dodging the storms that came from the south, COVID, and we worked with ADAP to test new wayfinding projects, as well as commenting on Metroax's safety and flex plans, as well as safety issues caused by various jurisdictional pushes for floating bus stops. Monday, the 20th, Mr. Wiedefeld joined our Metro Access Subcommittee to discuss the road forward and address customer concerns, as well as some of the community issues discussed at the FTA FAVE roundtables this summer, and many involved in Mr. Webster's presentations to you this morning at Finance Subcommittee. The DC Transit staff also discussed their program and its future. The AAC continues to support WMATA's new policy, fares, and service programs as it implements a safe, accessible, and sustainable return to normal. I'd like to echo Colonel Drummer's comments on agility, real-world data from this morning, and remind everybody the midterm elections are coming up. Votes on the October debt limit deadline and the federal funding rescue package will affect all of these. So I thank you, and we'll be happy to relay any board requests to the AEC and anything we can do to help in maintaining sustainability. Best wishes for October, and I hope many or all of you will take us up on our invitation to attend our meetings or join us on a ride. Have a great day. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Phil. Really appreciate all the work again that you and your committee do for us on our, on behalf of your riders, constituents, and how collaboratively you work with the staff. So thank you for that. Any questions for Mr. Posner? Okay. Seeing none. Again, thank you, Phil. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. See you all next month, and hopefully we'll have good news from the Congress.
All right. Next, we'll hear from our Rider Advisory Council Chair, Brian Mayers. Brian, good morning.
Thank you so much, Chairman Smedberg and fellow members of the WMATA Board of Directors. Thank you so much for having me this morning and being able to convey the recent work of the Riders Advisory Council. We did meet twice this month, once for a regular meeting and once a special meeting to discuss a particular proposal. During the meetings, we reviewed and discussed our FY22 work plan, which is a detailed proposal comprising of a variety of topics that ought to be addressed by the RAC over the course of this fiscal year. And we hope to adopt that plan in our upcoming meeting. And the purpose of this particular work plan, it will hopefully serve the goal of not only better organizing the work of the RAC, but ensuring that our work aligns with the priorities and decisions of the WMATA Board of Directors. Namely, we reviewed the fare policy principles and we got a little primer on our fare system for the metro system. And, the fare policy principles, as was mentioned, was adopted over 10 years ago. And there's definitely a need to reassess them as it pertains to operating a transportation system in 2021 and beyond. Mr. Wiedefeld and some of the directors made a great point this morning during the Finance and Capital Committee meeting that, when they emphasize that there needs to be a need to prioritize, equity, but also balancing the needs of the metro system, such as ensuring that revenue and ridership are where they need to be. We're looking forward to working with the board to ensure that those fare principles are updated and that changes to any fare structure, whether that be price or modality, align with said principles. And then lastly, while Chairman Smedberg, you did just mention this before transitioning to the advisory council reports, but we did have a robust public comment about the proposed changes to the WMATA tariff ridership rules and guidelines. Much like the board of directors experienced, a very diverse group of citizens from multiple jurisdictions, professional and personal backgrounds came and gave a near unanimous opposition to the proposed policy. The RAC, as representatives of the public and of the riders, we held a vote and unanimously recommended a no vote or not voting on this policy to the board of directors. So thank you for doing that. It should be noted that the statistics outlined in the Safety and Operations Committee just 45 minutes ago probably did indeed highlight the need to address crime on the metro system. We just thought that this particular plan presented was not the solution to the problem we face. Thank you. I'm looking forward to the continued work between the Riders Advisory Council and the Board of Directors. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. And just so we're clear, the proposed tariff was not to address, the overall crime issues. It was to address two very discrete, specific crimes, and people would not be, penalized because of an accusation. It would be because of the underlying fundamental law that we have in this land, that things are done, based on probable cause, not a simple accusation. So anyway, thank you for that. Are there any questions for Brian on the RAC?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd be curious. I think I don't want to get off topic. I think this discussion, there's a lot of misinformation about what exactly the tariff would have done and why it would have happened. But I would be curious, and it's not something that Brian would have the answer to now, but as the RAC continues to meet, I would be curious on sort of what strategies or thoughts the RAC members have on ways we can reduce crime. Presumably, we have a great sort of focus group of riders here, and I think some of them probably have experienced some concerns about this. So just as a future, sort of discussion or topic, I'd be interested in hearing some opinions as to what they think could be done. We've heard from, Mr. Leader earlier that we've stepped up visibility in certain sections and things like that. But if there are any ideas, I'd like to hear them. So just something to think about moving forward.
I agree, and I think that's something that I can go back to the RAC and try to incorporate into our work plan, because it's easy enough for us to say, no, we don't like any given proposal presented to us. But in terms of tackling some of the issues that have been discussed over, with this particular proposal, but really long-term existing issues, I think the public should be able to come up with some solutions, hopefully, for that. Yeah.
Great. All right, thank you. Anyone else? All right, thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. Take care now. All right, next we'll move on to my report. On behalf of the board, I want to take this opportunity to welcome our riders back. We know some businesses, schools, and organizations have started to bring employees and students back, and we're grateful many are choosing to take Metro. We've added more buses and trains, offered lower prices, and extended Metro Rail's operating hours on weekends. The service and pricing improvements are designed to make Metro a more affordable, attractive way to go and to meet customer needs for more service at all times of the day, not just during rush hour. We are ensuring Metro is there when people need it, and starting this week, for the first time in the agency's history, Metro customers will save up to 50% on select passes through October 15th. We are taking bold actions and things we've never done before to bring our riders back. That's also why the board's made reviewing fare policy one of its top priorities of the year. This morning, the fare policy work session will help the board formulate a range of options for our customers to consider in the upcoming budget process. We look forward to exploring more ways to bring back riders and attracting new ones. This concludes my report, and now I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Wiedefeld, our GM, for his report. Mr. Wiedefeld.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and
Good morning,
members of the board. Again, September has been a very busy month here at Metro as we welcome administrative employees back to the office and introduce new fare and service improvements, of some of which you just hit upon, Mr. Chairman. We've added more buses and trains to make sure Metro is a competitive travel option for riders heading to school, work, and other activities around the region. This has included adding more buses on the busiest lines, reducing wait times during the day, and restoring more service that had been suspended during the pandemic. As a result, Metrobus is now operating at 97% of pre-COVID service levels. Meanwhile, on Metro Rail, customers continue to return, although more slowly as travel patterns have dramatically changed. With average daytime customers' wait times ranging from just 2 to 7 minutes, Metro Rail service has surpassed 90% of pre-COVID service levels. As for fares, we currently, as you just mentioned, Mr. Chairman, we are offering the first ever sale of Metro passes with discounts up to 50% off of our 1 day, 1 week, or 1 month passes, among other offerings. The sale does end on October 15th, so please, please, please participate if you can. Other fare improvements that went into effect earlier this month include the new $2 fare per trip weekend flat fare, as well as a cheaper 7-day bus pass and free bus to rail transfers. As we watch how these new fare offerings are received by our customers, I look forward to continuing the conversation that kicked off today around the Metro's fare policy and concepts. With more buses and trains, fare discounts, improved ventilation, and enhanced cleaning, we want customers to know that Metro is here to get them wherever they want to go. We have seen an uptick in our rail ridership, with multiple days last week surpassing 190,000 Metro rides. And we're looking forward to soon passing 200,000 riders for the first time since the pandemic hit over 18 months ago. On the capital program side, we've continued our aggressive safety and reliability investments across the region with seamless transition between projects. In early September, 4 green and yellow line stations that were closed this summer for platform reconstruction reopened on time with safer concrete platforms, customer improvements like slip-resistant tiles, and larger next train signs. This brings the platform improvement project closer to the finish line, with 17 of the 20 stations complete and the remaining 3 scheduled for execution next summer. The following weekend in September, a 3-month station closure of the red line for Metro's Rockville canopy replacement project did kick off. Crews are busy demolishing the original station canopy that has significantly deteriorated over the years, as well as adding new customer improvements at the station. I do want to recognize the capital team for the significant work they've completed over the past few months and throughout this pandemic, as well as the operation folks and our union leadership partners for coordinating all these overlapping service changes due to COVID and capital work. They've done a tremendous job transitioning from one service plan to another as we've navigated the pandemic and worked to keep Metro safe and reliable for our customers. While on the topic of capital projects, I do want to briefly highlight one project that is still many years away from completion, but very important nonetheless. Earlier this week, we announced Metro's first all-electric bus garage will be built at Northern Bus Garage, DC. The bus garage is currently in design phase and will be built with infrastructure and equipment needed to run 100% electric buses. This is an important step towards Metro's commitment to help our region reduce its environmental footprint, improving public health, and modernizing our facilities. I want to thank the board for its leadership and support as we continue planning for Metro's transition to a 100% zero-emission fleet. Many challenges remain that will require significant regional investments and coordination, including energy infrastructure investments, new policies and rate structures, workforce training, and additional work to convert existing facilities and buses. But I'm confident that with the board's support and a regional commitment to Metro, we can successfully transition to a zero-emission bus service that will enable a clean and sustainable region, control operating costs, and supporting a more livable and prosperous region. That concludes my remarks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Wiedefeld. Does anyone have a question for the general manager or a comment? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it, and look forward to the upcoming discussions we have. Some very important ones coming up. So thank you. Next, we'll turn to a report by the Finance and Capital Committee. I'll turn over the chair now to Mr. Letourneau, who chairs that committee. Mr. Letourneau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The following item was referred to the board at the September 9th Finance and Capital Committee. Item A, FY22 Operating Budget Amendment. Staff is seeking approval of an amendment to the FY 2022 operating budget that increases utilization of federal relief to offset the financial effects of Metro's collective bargaining agreement, cost of living adjustments, the Juneteenth federal holiday, and the delay in opening the Potomac Yard Metro Rail station. That's about a little over $25 million budget adjustment. That was discussed at the Finance Committee's meeting on September 9th. Mr. Chairman, I move approval of the budget amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Letourneau. We have a motion on the table by Mr. Letourneau. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Deputy Mayor Babers. Motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none. Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers,
Aye.
Vice Chair Slater,
Aye.
Ms. Klein,
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau,
Aye.
Mr. Bulger,
Aye.
Mr. Drummer,
Aye.
Dr. Helfer,
I think I heard an aye there, Jennifer.
did you? Okay, I wasn't sure. Okay,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair,
I'm having,
It was an aye. I heard an aye.
yeah, okay, great. We'll count that as an aye. Thank you, Dr. Helfer. Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Ellison. Thank you, Mr. Letourneau and your committee. We now have 3 items on the board's consent agenda today. I would like to move approval of the following. First, an updated drug and alcohol policy, program policy. Staff seeks approval to amend the drug and alcohol program policy in accordance with recommendations and requirements from the Federal Transit Administration. Second, updated funds and grant program management. Staff seeks adoption of an updated grants and funds and grants management program policy. The updated policy will align the policy with changes in federal requirements and reflects changes to Metro's current processes, organizational structure, and roles and responsibilities. And last, indemnification of Norfolk Southern. Staff seeks approval to indemnify Norfolk Southern Railway Company within a purchase and sales agreement. I would like to move approval of these 3 items. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Secretary Slater. We have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions? Hearing none, Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers,
Aye.
Vice Chair Slater,
Aye.
Ms. Klein,
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau,
Aye.
Mr. Bulger,
Aye.
Mr. Drummer,
Aye.
Dr. Helfer.
aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, we'll move on to reports by the jurisdictions. Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. I personally don't have anything. Matthew, would you like to highlight anything?
No, just that the commission is having its own discussion about fare policy based on the presentation that was to the Finance Committee. We're soliciting input from our jurisdictions on that. I gave some of that today, but we're going to be doing a deeper dive. And then similarly, something like that will happen with the Blue, Orange, Silver study. There's briefings that will be occurring to the commission and its members, and then I expect that MVTC will be able to give some input on behalf of the Virginia jurisdictions.
Thank you. District of Columbia, Deputy Mayor Babers.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to highlight for everyone that DC for our FY22 budget calendar year, which starts October 1st, we will be doing bus priority, which should significantly help the metro buses in terms of avoiding congestion. Specifically, we're targeted to start with Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast, 8th Street Northwest, Minnesota Avenue Southeast, in addition to some other ones that are not yet in the design phase. We also, as part of our automated traffic enforcement system, we're going to be doing some automated enforcement of bus lanes, also starting in fiscal year 22. So we're hopeful that these two initiatives will greatly benefit WMATA in the in bus service. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lucinda. Next, WSTC, Secretary Slater.
Nothing to report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And finally, the federal government, Ms. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, there's quite a bit of activity in Congress and at USDOT regarding transit and transportation. It's all quite in flux, as I'm sure the board members and everyone else is aware. Hopefully there'll be an opportunity to discuss this further at a future board meeting when things are a little more clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, let's hope we have some clarity soon. All right, with no further business to come before the board, we stand adjourned, and I will move to executive session. In accordance with the bylaws, I, Paul Smedberg, request that the board of directors convene an executive session to discuss the following matters pursuant to Article 2, Paragraph 9, subsections A, budgetary matters that may affect legal positions, WMATA contracts, or sensitive relationships with local jurisdictions and the federal government, safety and security matters where premature release would compromise public safety. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Secretary Slater. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. We'll now convene an executive session. Thank you.